Well, thank you for staying with us here on KTN Business. Today, we start off in the power sector, where Kenyans could soon pay lower electricity bills as government has announced plans to have power project costs be denominated in local currency to insulate consumers against forex adjustment costs. KTN's Abiagina spoke to Engineer Joseph Njoroge, the Principal Secretary in the Ministry of Energy, on what this means for the cost of electricity in simple terms. Take a look.
Well, many thanks, Wakaba. We had the opportunity to speak to the Principal Secretary for Energy, and that is Joseph Njoroge. And just to pick off some of the key insights is that Kenya is looking towards having local currency denominated loans when it comes to setting up infrastructure in the energy sector. And he was quite optimistic, saying that this will have a big impact on reducing the cost of electricity in the country. Let's now listen in on some of his remarks.
We'll leave the ERC, who are the main players in this exercise, because they are the ones who eventually approve the PPAs, and Kenya Power and Lighting, who are the off-takers, and who also negotiate with the investors. I'll leave them to create a roadmap of making sure that we bring in the local currency as a component of the PPA. And that should not really take too long. It is really a question of categorizing the local costs and the foreign costs, and then using local currency for the local cost and foreign currency for the foreign cost. I think, as far as I'm concerned, it should be very soon, but I do not want to talk for them. What I expect after today's deliberation and the way forward is the ERC, KPLC, and investors will sit down and come up with how soon that can be. It should be as soon as possible from my perspective. Now, the other question that you have asked with regard to the impact of the local currency, I think if you look at our bills now, I think last month's bill, what we call the foreign exchange rate fluctuation, which looks at all loans which have been off-taken from the time we started this development. And it's not just that. There are also some other projects funded by both Kenya Power, KenGen, which used foreign currency. For example, at the moment, the loans which they do in Ketraco to put up the transmission lines, or even Kenya Power to put some of the distribution lines. Because some of those materials, most of them are actually foreign, they are also denominated in foreign currency. So looking in totality, all those loans that have been off-taken by KenGen, by Kenya Power, the last bill's foreign exchange rate fluctuation should have been 1 shilling and 10 cents, if I'm not wrong. It should be in that region. So that is really the impact, because that is now going to balance the difference between the change of the exchange rate today and those other previous times.
The introduction of local denominated loans for the infrastructure projects in Kenya is tipped to see the cost of power reduce significantly. Reporting for KTN News, I'm Abi Agina.
Well, Kenya is looking to tap into growing intra-Africa travel to expand its tourism sector as African countries seek to create a continental free trade area, or CFTA. The Cabinet Secretary for Tourism and Wildlife, Najib Balala, says that Kenya's tourism industry is increasingly reaping from the strong business, cultural and linguistic ties between African countries that have made intra-regional trade a vibrant growth market. Now, speaking on the sidelines of the 61st UNWTO Regional Commission for Africa Conference in Abuja in Nigeria, Balala said, and here I quote, "In 2017, Africa accounted for 29% of international travels into Kenya. Indeed, Africa has shown great potential over the last 5 years, gaining a 5% share of arrivals by the region over the last 5 years. We believe that Africa is the next frontier for the business of tourism," end quote. The CS, who is also the chair of the United Nations World Tourism Organization Commission for Africa, credited this to Kenya's increased investment in African markets such as Uganda, South Africa, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Rwanda over the last 3 years. Well, moving on, Nairobi is set to this week host the multi-billion-dollar global flower industry fraternity for a 3-day international flower trade and exhibition that opens tomorrow on Wednesday, June the 6th, 2018, right here in Nairobi. Now, for the first time in Kenyan flower history, buyers from the United States will be in attendance, encouraged by the introduction of direct flights between Kenya and the US and the growing interest in Kenyan flowers by the Americans. Now, flowers and horticultural produce from Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Ethiopia and Rwanda will be on display to international buyers from 60 countries from all continents. This year marks the introduction of the Fresh Produce exhibition, which will bring together local growers of fruits, vegetables, herbs and spices, and international buyers. The new development is meant to position Kenya as an agriculture hub in Africa and position the country as the continent's host to the world's largest horticulture trade shows. Now, Primarosa Flowers Limited, a subsidiary of the Zurich Group Global, has today called on the Kenya Flower Council and floriculture industry to set up its own independent and international flower auction to make the industry more attractive, productive, and efficient. According to Boby Kamani, the managing director at Primarosa Flower Kenya Limited, Kenya has a solid infrastructure, favorable climate, and is a reputable commercial hub, and has a very productive workforce that is the backbone to the industry. Now, Kenya still relies very heavily on selling cut flowers in Aalsmeer in Netherlands at the Dutch flower auctions. Now, approximately 50% of all flowers exported into the EU markets are sold through the Dutch auctions, although direct sales are growing. In the United Kingdom, supermarkets are the main outlets. Now, Kenya's other products like tea and coffee industries have had their own auction houses since 1956. The Nairobi Coffee Exchange has been around since around 1934. Well, let's give you some of the numbers around this industry, especially because this is an industry that has been driving the economy. Now, this is floriculture by the numbers. We start with 38%, which is the percentage of all flowers that go into the EU that are from Kenya. This, of course, means that Kenya is earning quite a large chunk of money from this, well, amount of flowers. Now, floriculture earnings in 2017, 82.25 billion shillings worth. This, of course, means that this is the cash that the entire industry did pull together from selling into that market from floriculture. And, well, total flower weight, the flowers, of course, that were sold for the 82.5 billion shillings, 160,000 tons. The US market is worth 10 billion shillings. This is the figure that the Kenyan market wants to tap into. Of course, it is a market that is up for grabs because Kenya, being the world's, well, single largest producer and exporter of cut flowers, then meaning that they have competitive advantage and are calling dibs on that figure. Now, 100,000, this is the number of employees that are employed by flower farms. The investors, of course, pump in money, which is not only used to produce the flowers, but also pay these people, thus impacting on over 2 million people directly or indirectly. That is 2 million livelihoods impacted directly by the industry. Quite some impressive numbers. Then, of course, well, a number that needs to be put into perspective so that we can get these directly from the horse's mouth. And to do just that, right here in studio with us, Boby Kamani, the managing director at Primarosa Flowers, a company that is also owned by Zurich Global, is here in studio. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much.
Now, a lot of big news coming out this week, of course, apart from the fact that today being World Environment Day, the fact that we expect to go into one of the largest exhibitions, one of the largest meetings for cut flowers right across the region, right across the world here tomorrow. You are in the floriculture business. What does this mean to you?
Well, for us, the International Flower Trade Expo has been around for, well, this is the 7th year running. And it shows the confidence that the international buyers, the government players, and the local producers have on Kenya as a country, not only as a grower, but also as a destination to host this International Flower Trade Expo. So for us, it's great because we are actually bringing everyone right to where it all began.
Well, one of the things that is different this time around is the fact that we have buyers from the Americas, some of the largest markets in the world, which have been, in a manner of speaking, inaccessible because of the distances that we have had to travel indirectly. With the entry of direct flights into the US market, this now becomes a much shorter distance, much less time required. What does this mean?
Well, for us, we've always had to rely on various airlines to carry our roses across the world.
Yes.
And with direct flights from Nairobi to New York, this is just the start for the US market. And like you mentioned earlier, the US market is a 10 billion shilling market for flower growers here in Kenya per year. At this point, I don't think we've even tapped even 1 billion. So we've not even tapped 10% of what we can actually tap into within the US market.
We've seen a perspective from AGOA where we are told that this enables us to get some goods in under preferential terms, being able to bear risk scratch surface, especially because we haven't been able to manufacture much. Do you think this might go some way in enabling us to start to leverage some of that?
I think it will, definitely. Yes.
Let's talk about the wider market. The fact that we have been told that we might start to get into the Atlanta airways soon after the New York market. This also means that South America, Northern America in terms of Canada and the rest of that general area is up for grabs. This has a huge potential. What does it mean for producers here in this part of the world? Are we looking at expansions? Are we looking at enhanced investment? What exactly is up for grabs?
Well, for us at the moment, we're looking at just, as an industry, we're looking at expanding. And the global growth rate for cut flowers is 5% every year. And if we are to achieve that, then we need to either consolidate the smaller farms, expand into newer farms, or explore newer markets. And that is the only way we are going to be able to achieve that 5% every year.
Looking at some of the things that have happened in the past and the fact that we have to literally fly our flowers all the way to the Dutch auctions, and the fact that we have seen as recently as 2 weeks ago concerns about people like the South Africans having to get our markets either wrongly or not get our flowers from the Dutch auctions. We have had you call for introduction of our own auction system right here to be able to bring the global buyers to Kenya so that much more of the value then gets left here, that we are in control of our flowers and that sort of thing. What would that take and what can we reap because of that?
Well, I think it's simple. When you look at the fact that the International Flower Trade Expo is happening here every year, why can't it happen here every day? Why can't Kenya become a marketplace for the flowers that it grows itself? You know, for a long time, the Dutch have been there. They've really enabled us to enhance our processes in ways of production, build a sustainable place for work for the people that work for the flower farms. And we've learned great things from the Dutch. But now the time has come that why can't we get our independent international flower auction where everybody can come here and the flowers can go to different parts of the world. A lot of the challenges that we face can be overcome by having an auction here in Kenya itself.
What are some of those concerns? Because for most people, when they hear about auctions, it doesn't matter to them because they're not really at that level. What would it take and what are the concerns essentially, the fact that this auction is overseas?
Well, first of all, you know, we would like to see differences or incentives in terms of taxation, in terms of transport, in terms of logistics. In terms of taxation, we would really call upon the Kenya Flower Council to talk to, you know, the government, the private sector, the public sector, talking to each other and seeing ways where they can incentivize, you know, farm inputs that are coming in, that are being imported for better services, for better processes. And that's what we would really be looking at.
The budget is actually coming up now that you mentioned taxation. And the fact of the matter has been that government will always tweak taxes in one way or another in order to try and become either more efficient in collection or send the tax net wider. As an exporter, there are concerns in various ways, various arenas. For example, there is VAT that is charged on a lot of the inputs that go into this. A lot of that's still in abeyance and never really collected. It's been something that continues to be kicked down the road. Lots of the inputs that I used to put up greenhouses and that sort of thing still remain very expensive. A lot of this money can be better used at the grassroots for various initiatives.
Yes. Well, I think when you are being self-regulated as an industry, then you are already taking care of things that can be handled at the grassroots level. When you are fair trade compliant
Yes.
or Kenya Flower Council certified, there are certain standards that you have to uphold, whether it is safety of workers at your workplace or it's the responsible producing of flowers so that you're not affecting the environment in a detrimental way. So either way, you are going to be taking care of the local side, irrespective of the incentives that the government can and will be able to give to us in the future.
Let's talk a bit about other markets. For example, South Africa. We've seen that in places where they produce things like wine, this has now turned into something that attracts even tourists. It becomes a wine tour, for example, farm tours, things like that. We have barely started to scratch the surface for some of these things, essentially, even especially knowing that Kenya is already doing very well in terms of tourism. What do we have to do to incentivize the creation of these sorts of things so that we can say that, for example, we can invite the Mzungus to come and see where the flowers come from. They can come and see the process itself before going back home, very happy that the flowers they have been buying are working for some Africans somewhere. What do we have to do to get this to become reality?
I think first and foremost, the Kenya Tourism Board needs to look at ecotourism.
Yes.
And I think with ecotourism, like you said, calling visitors from overseas to do, farm tours, tours of different rose farms or different vegetable farms, that kind of ties them in to seeing what the local culture is, how the local people live, as well as look at many different areas of the country that they can actually tour.
And this can be tied into the tourism that we have now, both the bush and the beach, because if people are coming to Kenya anyway, and they might travel across the country to go to different destinations, why not build in some of the things that we're talking about as a freebie just to start this off?
Absolutely, and I think that is definitely a great initiative that we should be taking.
Let's talk finally about the future, the fact that with the development of the counties, we've started to see various initiatives start to go out in ways that incentivize people like you to go out into the countryside. So you leave Nairobi, Athi River right here, and go to Nyandarua, that sort of thing. Are the counties working hard enough to bring investors to literally the grassroots?
I think counties are working hard enough, but I think they can work harder.
Yes.
Because I'll give you an example of my work experience in India.
Yes.
When I was in India in the hospitality industry there, different states had different marketing budgets, and they had different marketing tools for targeting visitors and targeting investors. So if the different states in India can do the same thing, why can't we do that in terms of different counties?
How then would you be able to extrapolate that to our situation here? What are we looking at? Are we looking at county bodies that then go out and start to decide that this is what we are going to brand for this county and this is what we want to pursue?
I would say that some counties are a lot more proactive than others.
Yes.
And I think if the counties that are proactive can lead by example, I'm sure the other counties will also learn and lead to follow.
Who would you hold up as an example that is proactive and is doing quite a bit that others can emulate?
I think Kwale, first of all. First and foremost, I think Kwale definitely is a county that is going out there. Turkana is another county that I feel is going out there. Traditionally, Turkana was not known as a tourist spot or a spot for investors. With, of course, now you've got the highlight of the oil tankers leaving just last week with His Excellency the President.
Yes.
So that has given it a lot of importance and prominence. But why can't that prominence just continue? Why can't we have Turkana being marketed as a destination for tourism as well as for investment?
Finally, the fact that as we have gotten out of the political silly season, we're starting to see the country start to normalize and business start to come back on its feet. What are the things that you think we need to get right going forward so that we see that businesses are able to recoup the losses that they made last year and then get a springboard into the future in a way that is sustainable and enables them to keep growing and at a global level?
Well, I think if I can speak from last year's political climate, if you look at the floriculture and the hospitality industries, I don't think it actually made a huge difference to those industries.
So there was resilience.
There was resilience because floriculture increased by 20%.
Wow.
Hospitality revenues increased by 20%. Now, in a politically uncertain year, if you're increasing by 20%, imagine the kind of potential you have when there is no political uncertainty.
So we can say then that we're looking at good numbers for this year.
We're looking at good numbers, but we also need to make sure we're not complacent.
Okay. Indeed, Boby Kamani, thank you very much, sir, for taking
Thank
the
you.
time to talk to us. It has been a pleasure. Of course, a man at the global cutting edge of both the tourism and hospitality sectors, operating out of 3 continents. Thank you very much for taking the time. Well, on that informative and entertaining note, that's where we want to bring it to a close here on KTN Business today. Of course, to remind you that tomorrow the event around the exhibition and sale of flowers opens here in Nairobi in Parklands. Of course, you want to visit that just to be able to get a perspective on the floriculture perspective. Also to remind you that in just a few minutes, it will be Mbiu KTN in Swahili from, KTN News, the Swahili desk. But we will be back at the same time tomorrow with more from the world of news, and we'll see you again at 9 p.m. for more on KTN Business. My name is Peter Akaba. It has indeed been a pleasure. Kwaheri ya kuonana.